If you've ever waded into the ocean at your popular local beach, there's a good chance you were less than 100 yards from a shark. Before your brain goes full jaws, there's a caveat. Most of the sharks that cruise the shoreline aren't particularly big, they're babies. Juvenile blacktip sharks, little leopard sharks, young reef sharks. Think of all these as little ocean toddlers, hiding in the shallows where it's relatively safe. But here's where it gets a bit more daunting. Hop in a boat and head 200, 500, or even 800 miles offshore. Something changes. Our ocean toddlers tend to vanish, and suddenly the ocean isn't a nursery anymore. Out here, you don't meet juveniles, you meet 2,000-pound mega sharks, 20-foot giants, true apex predators that have ruled the open ocean for decades. But the question is, why? Why does distance from land seem to correlate with size? Why do sharks get bigger the farther you go from shore? Is it just coincidence, or is there some fundamental biological laws at work here? Today then, we're diving into what scientists often quietly observe but very rarely name. It's something I like to call the giant gradient. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the isolated and deep pelagic ocean is an ecosystem built for behemoths, why small sharks can't really survive there, and why the farther you go from land, the more you end up in a world where size is the only currency that matters. Welcome back to another Shark Bytes episode, everyone. Now, to truly understand why the giants are offshore, we've first got to piece together why the youngsters are at the beach, and in the scientific literature, this is known as the nursery divide. Research by Dr. Neil Hammerschlag and his team on tiger shark ontogeny, which is just a fancy scientific word for how an organism grows throughout its life, shows us that juvenile sharks are physically tethered to the shore. For a shark species under 4 or 5 feet long, like a juvenile blacktip shark, the open ocean is basically a death trap because literally everything out there wants to eat you. Whereas in the shallows or the mangroves or the inshore reefs and seagrass beds, these areas provide security. They're teeming with lots of small nutrient-rich food sources, and importantly, they're also full of places to hide from the very giants that we're going to be talking about shortly. A juvenile tiger shark stays inshore because it's safe and the food that it can eat there is bite-sized, but as that shark grows and gets a little bit bigger, its energy demands go up considerably, and eventually it hits a threshold size. The safety of the shore suddenly becomes a place where it just can't survive anymore because there simply isn't enough high-calorie fuel to support its larger body. So that shark has to leave and head offshore to find that higher energy prey, the remote atolls where there's loads of sea turtles, or the floating whale carcasses out in the open ocean, the abundant food sources that are more common out in the deep. Growing up for a shark literally means moving further away from shore, and the satellite tracks confirm it. Within that tiger shark study we just mentioned, smaller individual tiger sharks, shown on this map here as blue dots, on average were detected about 45 miles from shore. Medium-sized tiger sharks, the yellow dots, had a similar distribution of positions as the smaller sharks, but averaged a distance of around 54 miles offshore. But then our larger tiger sharks, the biggest ones in the study, averaged a distance of 70 miles offshore. These big uns spent most of their time in slope waters as opposed to shelf waters, which are further out to sea. To be fair, there are some seasonality factors going on here as well, with different life stages using the ocean in varying ways depending on the time of year, but that study is a pretty good demonstration that the youngsters tend to stick closer to shore and the adults venture further afield. Back in 2019, though, scientists realized a slightly more disturbing reason as to why we don't get the truly massive individuals of a species closer to land. This city right here is New York. If we zoom out and overlay this radius on our map, you can see it encompasses all of those northeastern American states and almost touches the tip of northeast Florida. It's a huge area. Specifically, it's 775 miles. And when we're thinking about shark size relative to distance from shore, in science there's something called the 775-mile rule, otherwise known as the human shadow. In areas close to cities with more than 10,000 people, large sharks have virtually been wiped out by industrial fishing. And based on a study from the Zoological Society of London back in 2019, there's a specific tipping point, the 775-mile rule. That research, after dropping over 1,000 baited underwater cameras across the Indo-Pacific, found that many sharks don't truly reach their maximum biological potential until they're at least 775 miles away from the nearest human market. In other words, there's a wilderness threshold where these incredibly remote places are untouched by humans, so sharks end up reaching their maximum sizes. Along the coast, the sharks appear to stay small because all the bigger ones end up getting caught, but offshore, that human shadow lifts. And the giant sharks that live there aren't just there because they like the deep ocean, they're there because it's one one of the very few places we've left for them where they can thrive. Now, if you're not quite buying this concept yet, let's have a look at a place that shows distance correlating with size. Norfolk Island is a tiny speck in the South Pacific, nearly 900 miles off the Australian coast. And according to the scientific research that's been done on tiger sharks here, the population that frequents this island is an anomaly. The data, when you actually look at it, is quite staggering. Tiger sharks around Norfolk average 0.6 meters or 2 feet longer than their counterparts near the Australian mainland. And in shark physics, that could potentially make them 70% heavier as well. Based on footage and studies from the likes of Charlie Hooverneers and Jordan Matley, many of the tiger sharks that have been satellite tagged at Norfolk are some of the biggest individuals to ever be tagged. And looking at this footage, you can see it. Some of these tiger sharks are utterly giant. But why are they so big here? Well, because Norfolk Island is very isolated, it hosts massive breeding colonies of wedge-tailed shearwaters at certain times of the year, and the sharks have just learnt to suction the fatty, high-calorie seabirds right off the surface while they're rafting. But it's because Norfolk is so far away from the mainland that even with a human population there, nature can still just do its thing. If we just quickly go back to that bar chart, you can see that another location has had some pretty big tiger sharks as well: Hawaii. Now, although the largest individuals here are about consistent with the global average, previous studies have found that the tiger sharks here grow twice as fast as scientists previously thought. This growth rate has been linked to their broad diet across the islands, but considering Hawaii sits about 2,500 miles from the US mainland, it's likely that the pure isolation here may also be playing a role in enabling them to grow fast and reach big sizes. Now, highly calorific food at those remote islands can of course help you reach those massive sizes, but offshore, being larger in size can actually help you physiologically. And it comes down to something called Bergmann's rule. This particular ecological principle suggests that animals in colder environments tend to be larger to retain heat more efficiently. More often than not, the principle is associated with endothermic animals like mammals, but there is some evidence it occasionally can be applied to sharks. Historically, research has shown us that prehistoric megalodons who lived in cooler, higher latitude waters grew to larger sizes compared to those in warmer equatorial waters. And even though it hasn't yet been fully scientifically demonstrated in lots of modern sharks, considering white sharks are regionally endothermic, they as a species might be more prone to following Bergmann's rule. But what about for most other shark species, the cold-blooded ones, the ectotherms? Well, these sharks have an extra trick up their sleeves, and it's all to do with thermal mass. A 1,500-pound cold-blooded tiger shark is kind of like a giant thermal battery. Its massive body retains core heat much more efficiently than a smaller shark does. And it's this thermal mass that allows it to survive in these deep open ocean environments, often diving down into the midnight zone thousands of feet down. Smaller sharks here would simply freeze, their muscles would seize up and they'd stop working, whereas a 16-foot adult female tiger shark, who you'd normally associate with warmer tropical waters, can dive down to hunt in the cold abyss and then return to the surface with their core temperature barely dropping. Being giant in size is basically like having a biological winter coat that gives them access to ecosystems that smaller sharks just wouldn't be able to cope with. And it's because these sharks are so large that they're even able to reach these deep remote islands in the first place. Back in 2002, researchers discovered one of the craziest aggregations for white sharks in the world: the White Shark Café. This mysterious meeting spot, found roughly 1,500 miles off the coast of Mexico, hosts some of the biggest adult white sharks in the world, often measuring over 5 meters in length. Every winter, the sharks leave the coast and end up congregating here in the summer, swimming those huge distances offshore to a seemingly empty patch of the Pacific. But here's the weird bit. There aren't any seals here, which are the normal prey species for big, mature white sharks. And based on extensive research down the years here, though, we know now they come here not to hunt seals, but to hunt in the deep scattering layer where huge waves of deep-sea squid and lanternfish hang out in the depths during the day. But only the largest sharks make this enormous trek, because the larger individuals are more metabolically efficient. So even though they have higher total energy demands, when they get to these big sizes of 16 or 17 feet long, they end up having lower metabolic costs. These massive sharks have the ability to cruise for thousands of miles on just a single meal, whereas smaller sharks would run out of fuel way before they reach the cafe. So these bigger offshore individuals end up looking bigger here simply because their size has allowed them to make the journey in the first place. The White Shark Cafe is basically an elite club where unless you're big, you're not allowed in. Now, if Norfolk Island is for tiger sharks, then Guadalupe is for great whites. Located 150 miles off Baja, this volcanic Peak is an absolute fortress for the 20-footers. This is of course the home of Deep Blue, possibly one of the largest great white sharks to ever be caught on film. But at only 150 miles from the mainland, that distance doesn't really come anywhere close to our 775-mile rule. So why is it that Guadalupe has such big individuals? Well, the secret ingredient here is upwellings. Strong offshore winds push surface water away, allowing nutrient-rich deep water to bounce off the volcanic base of the island and rise towards the surface. And these upwellings can create localized explosions in marine biodiversity. Microscopic organisms are drawn in by the nutrient upwellings, which brings in the fish and the squid, which brings in the high-calorie elephant seals, the white shark's ultimate prize. But the shelves around Guadalupe are sheer drops, plummeting thousands and thousands of meters down into the deep. So to efficiently hunt here, you need the mass to handle those cold dives and the power to take down a 4-ton elephant seal. I think at Guadalupe, the isolated island rule takes over. Here, there's a lack of competition compared to the mainland, and so the sharks here don't really have any rivals. And then if you pair that with a high-calorie food in those elephant seals, that means you get some massive sharks here. So the next time you're at the beach and you're stood looking out towards the horizon, you're essentially looking at a border. On your side, the nursery, the human shadow, where sharks are generally small and they stay small to survive us. But all the way out into the deep, past those 775 miles, you've got the last true marine wilderness. I think we live in a time now where almost every corner of the earth has been mapped or tamed by humans, but the deep offshore ecosystems remain just about as a last holdout. Protecting places like the White Shark Café, the rugged volcanic cliffs of Guadalupe, and the bird-rich waters of Norfolk Island is the only way we're going to preserve these ocean wildernesses and the huge sharks that live there. Because I think lots of you would probably agree that a world without giant sharks is a world that's just a little bit less awesome and wonderful. There's something fascinating about the biggest individuals of a certain species, and it really captivates your imagination, so it would be such a shame to lose that. Now, throughout this video, you've heard me mention Norfolk Island quite a lot, and in this video here, I tell you all about it. In it, we dive deep into these mysterious and massive tiger sharks and question whether cows might be playing a role in why they get so big here. And yes, I did say cows, so make sure you give this video a watch to find out more.